Welcome back to the Reliably Intermittent podcast. Back again with you for another episode. I'm just going to stop saying numbers because at some point, all right, we're just doing so many of these. What's the point in knowing like the number, right?
Yeah, like number H.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, subcategory 4. Back again, Aaron Ware here, and with me as like almost always, Drew Esposito. How you doing?
Doing good. Just trying to some of those days I feel like you're just trying to keep your head above water, man, you know? But at least we'll start being more reliably intermittent with the podcast. So, you know.
I seem to find those are most of the days that end in Y sometimes. So what's on the good to talk about today?
My thought process, at least, is coming into the 13th month of 2020. All right. What changes from a personnel standpoint at the federal level are we going to have to be cognizant of as human resource professionals, as consultants, as attorneys? Because so much of our jobs and so much of people serving our role advising clients is what are these administrative agencies promulgating, like their rulemaking authority. So we've got Biden has come in. So there's going to be this shift. Is it a seismic shift? Is it a baby shift? So do we have a list of who's taking over for who's getting pushed out? I don't know. I haven't kept up with it.
Sure. Well, and you know, I think it's one of those things that the nerds of us keep an eye on, the junkies of us keep an eye on, just because, you know that when somebody's in a role over an agency like the EEOC or the Nlrb or one of those, they essentially set the tone for how issues that get brought to those different agencies' attention get handled, and kind of the direction. They're essentially policymakers. They set the direction for how those things get handled. And anytime you go from an R to a D or a D to an R, there's always a shift in focus. Big caveat on a lot of these. So let's talk about some of the new appointees to cabinet level or agency head level positions are going to require some kind of Senate approval. So these are all pending, but based off of the makeup of the current federal government, it seems that there's a high likelihood that these people are going to be in these roles. So the big one that kind of a lot of this flows from is this Secretary of Labor, the cabinet level position. We actually talked about this in pre-prep. Is an individual named Marty Walsh.
Solid name.
Yeah, Marty. Just, you know, people in power, and maybe that's just stupidity on my part. Just you don't seem to run into a ton of Martys.
Or that's like your bio name, you know, like Secretary of Labor Martin Walsh.
Right.
You know, yeah, I go by Marty, but you know,
right. I'm Marty. I want to be known. He's the cool teacher, right? I'm Mr. Walsh, but you can call me Marty.
Yeah.
Former mayor of Boston, former local union president. So obviously more than likely, a pro-labor, pro-union philosophical approach. I think you'd put that under the pro-employee. Not that anybody would ever admit to being anti-employee, but just, you know, philosophically with that kind of background, that kind of bent coming up in the world professionally.
You know which union he was the president of?
Not offhand. I'm sure I could find it. It's not like one of the big ones that everybody knows, from what I could tell. Because I know that one of the appointees was counsel for like the steel workers and that sort of a thing. But essentially, you know, Secretary of Labor has that kind of, you want to talk about 1,000-foot approach as a commission or an agency head, that's cabinet level. So your Department of Labor, your EEO, your Nlrb, they all kind of flow back up the chain of command to the cabinet level position. So that's where everything starts, right? So when you're putting somebody in that position, with that background, I think that sets a tone right off the top.
For sure.
So let's move into the one for the labor nerds out there, the NLRB. So this was kind of a rip from the headlines thing. Within 24 hours of now President Biden being sworn in, there was the situation with the general counsel, now former general counsel Peter Robb. That was an interesting one because we do this, kind of the would you like to quit or would you like to be fired kind of discussion. And now Mr. Robb decided that he wasn't quitting.
Yeah. He said, fire me, baby.
Yeah. So President Biden did that. There was an acting general counsel for like 12 hours. I think, what was her name? Alice Stock, whatever. She was within the NLRB council arm. But she was also removed the next day. And the acting general counsel is an individual by the name of Peter Sung Orr.
Okay.
Forgive me, I've only read it. So I'm not trying to mispronounce it. I don't know if that's how it's said. But basically, that acting counsel is limited to 40 days unless, for whatever reason, he gets nominated formally. But the word on the street, as I've seen it so far, well, I tell you what, let's play a game, Drew. So the individual is not Peter Sung Orr that is being floated around out there. But the game I would like to play, the person, before I give you the name of the person in the background, what kind of job do you think the now likely nominee to NLRB General Counsel, what kind of background, what kind of work do you think this individual had before this role?
For general counsel for NLRB?
Yeah, from a politically appointed position. What do you think they used to do? We'll just go most recently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're general counsel for the NLRB, your prior history should be some sort of, it could be both side representation, but some sort of like administrative law judge, arbitrator, mediator with like a background advocating for employee and employer rights. Like a lot of times you'll see someone who's like a employee advocate, then they flip over to management and have like 15 years in this industry to give them kind of the appearance of neutrality, I should say.
Full range, a full scope of the different sides of issues that could be faced by this highly necessary position in determining the legal status of various issues facing unions and employers on a national scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a political appointment, but I mean, in an ideal world, I think you try to be, I would hope you try to be sitting in a situation of neutrality, and you're just reading the law for what it is.
Well, I admire your approach to these issues, but I think the individual that's being nominated or likely to be nominated is Jennifer Abruzzo, and she continues a long line of partisan political appointed positions, as she was a former special counsel for the Communication Workers of America. So a union.
Yeah, CWA.
I think we could go back in time and look at what Mr. Robb's previous career was. So we're not trying to both sides shame or shame sides. Just it's another one in a long line of political appointments to positions that you would hope to see some level of neutrality, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting. But we can't be Pollyanna-ish in our approach to act like we didn't know.
It's so frustrating. Like people are going to get whiplash, right? Employers are going to get whiplash because it feels like the appointments, since they're political, are getting further and further away from central. Like if you took over for, the opposite party, you pandered to your base. So it's like, I need to put in someone who is even more further, left or right than my predecessor. And then the other person, like, because part of their marketing is the Democrats put in a former union special counsel, so I'm going to put in, and it's going to be some, 79-year-old white guy, who fits every archetype of being a union buster, like, rather than just somebody who can
Sure.
talk to both sides. And
Like,
employers bear the brunt because the new rules come out and new regulations. Fine, now we got to undo that policy and put in this policy, undo this policy, put in this policy.
yeah, the National Chamber of Commerce General Counsel will be the next one, right? If an R gets into office, or former special counsel to Procter and Gamble for the last 15 years, or whatever. Insert large company A and their attorney. It just kind of is what it is.
Like, and I think we were talking about this earlier today, me and you. May come up, today or whatever, but like, oh, I was counsel to Uber and Lyft that was defending our gig economy, and now I become the Department of Labor secretary, like, and they were ruling against me or ruling in favor of me, whatever have you,
Yeah.
Strange.
So let's see here. It does sound like on that line, the Uber gig economy thing, that the word on the street is that an advice memo put out by the prior administration Nlrb General Counsel on how to classify Uber and gig economy workers. The big issue that we'll be talking about on a different podcast that'll be released here in the near future, as to whether or not they're independent contractors or employees, and all the different accoutrement that comes with those classifications, or doing it wrong, that they're going to be revising potentially, or addressing, maybe. I don't want to say revising. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but addressing that advice memo from 18 months ago, give or take.
Okay.
So just an example of how these things, like you were talking about, this whiplash can go. Yeah. So some of the other agencies that we're talking about here, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. So the Federal Contractor Watchdog Agency, basically.
Is that OFCP?
OFCCP.
OFCCP.
Yep. A lot of letters, long acronym. I think once your acronyms get larger than 4 letters,
too much.
Aren't we getting a little cumbersome? But
Too much.
we're the nerds in the company that like to talk about fonts. So
True.
Obviously we're going to dive into acronyms as well. But anyway, Jenny Yang, previously with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a nice 4-letter acronym agency, former head of the EEOC, will be tasked with heading the OFCCP, which, again, example here, the big thing that seems to be, or at least one of the initial big things, because you can have more than one big thing, is pay equity, a focus on pay equity for federal contractors. So for those of you out there, I think the suggestion would be, and I'm sure we'll talk about it if it actually becomes reality. For those of you that are federal contractors, federal money reliant operations, that they're going to be taking a pretty particular focus on pay equity, which, again, these aren't big secrets. These are things. These were platforms or portions of platforms that the president ran on.
Examine that.
Say again.
I wonder how they're going to try to kind of audit that. If the focus is on these independent third-party federal contractors, what type of oversight to examine pay? Is it pay and equity within the federal contractor's business, or is it pay and equity between federal contractors?
I mean, I'm sure it could go in a couple different permutations, because we have those affirmative action plans and things like that, where you have to, where there are requirements within grants, there are requirements within certain revenue streams that you get from federal, state agencies, whatnot, that require you to take a look at your demographic data or whatever. My guess is there'll be some kind of language, some kind of strings attached to monies that require you to do certain things and turn over certain data to this watchdog agency to see how you're doing, which I guess the idea there would be to force entities that currently are not to look at their pay practices.
Yeah. But, a laudable goal. I don't think you're not going to get any employer out there who's going to fight that one too much.
The fight will be over the conclusions, as we've seen for going on ever. Basically, as more women have been introduced or continue to work in the workforce. Just this ain't a new issue. There just may be a different focus. And then last, but certainly not least, at least for today, is a little juxtaposition of those first ones, is the appointment or likely appointment of Charlotte Burrows to head the EEOC. And I say the juxtaposition here is because this one, the EEOC is made up of this board where there's still a Republican appointed majority on the commission. So their terms, are staggered. So the run out on some of these positions before new appointees are appointed to see a majority, likely, just like you did under the previous administration, the administration before that, the administration before that, of the opposite party majority on that. So the juxtaposition there is there are goals. Every agency, every head has goals when they put people in positions of power. Those just may not be as easy to accomplish with the construct of the commission. And those are the things you're thinking about with discriminatory harassment guidance or decisions made at that commission level.
Okay.
You can still put out direction, but to the folks on the ground, but it's a little different when you've got that barrier, for lack of a better way of putting it, between the front line and the top line.
Yeah, that board until it turns over is kind of insulated.
Sure. Which theoretically is designed to address what you talked about earlier with our situation with the NLRB.
Yeah.
Having some modicum of addressing the possibility of partisanship in an agency that is at least ostensibly not supposed to be a partisan agency.
It's just I don't know. I mean, especially NLRB. Because they issue decisions, so it's akin to court, right? It's quasi judicial, and in the court realm, in the judicial realm, you've got stare decisis, you've got precedent, you've got all of these things that prevent this whipsaw, right? And I know that's why the Supreme Court has been a pressing issue for both parties, but it makes life very easy, or easier, when dealing with very muddy issues that HR is, when we at least know we have consistency in how courts rule. And it stinks when the NLRB issues guidance one year and then completely flips it the next year. It's like, how as an employer are you supposed to manage?
Sure. Well, and yeah, you apply, let's take a relatively apolitical example. Okay. So something that happened toward the end of the Obama administration on the salary basis threshold test, right? So rule gets announced, salary threshold is going to increase to this. And we then go in and try to work with our clients to figure out, how is that going to affect your workforce? The people that are in between the previous threshold and the new threshold, how do you address that? Can you look at your existing staff, the duties that they do, the pay bands that they're in, those sorts of things? Then it immediately gets challenged in court. And then we get a new administration in there, and then they rewrite the rule. But in the meantime, you've effectively changed your compensation structure to address the old rule. And now what do you do? Now it's this, like you said, I think it's a good word for it. It's a whipsaw effect on just the practical realities of managing a workforce on the ground level that gets washed into kind of these political battles.
Yeah.
And there isn't the appreciation, I think, for that frontline practical,
real world, applicability. I mean,
there you go.
If you're talking, and we have HR generalists, you got HR directors, you got maybe some in-house legal counsel, outside counsel. What's the advice on these appointments? Is it just be aware? Is it wait and see?
Well, you always have to work within what exists at the time you make a decision, right? But I think what we can read from some of the tea leaves here is that there is obviously going to be a trend to a more pro-employee focus on rulemaking,
Okay.
decision making, things of that nature. We can learn lessons from the past on how we handle things in the future when there have been transitions of this type, and that the leadership appointments and things of that nature that are happening now, I think obviously you still deal with what you know today and you make the decisions based off the information and the rules that are in play today. But I think the more prospective planners in our audience would be wise to realize that, hey, we need to be cognizant and be ready to be malleable or flexible on some of the likely things that are coming, and they're announcing some of the things that they're looking at. So not necessarily are we going ahead and making the change because we think it may happen in the future. We just go ahead and create contingency plans for some of these things and how we want to make our policies or rules or applications based off of what is likely to come. Just forethought.
Yeah. And I guess the flip side, if you were in the process of maybe making a change based on a rule or an administrative memo that was in place, double check that it hasn't been put on hold.
Yes. Again, you're going to have to take some additional steps to see what the rule is that you're trying to address.
Okay.
So want to thank everybody for listening to this drier topic than is typical, but no less important than man caves under a subway. Still important, maybe a little bigger.
Don't we all need a reprieve from riots, sedition, and all that fun stuff, right?
Sure.
So dry is good.
Dry can be good. Drew, as always, thank you for joining me on this journey.
Thanks, brother.
And to listeners and viewers, pound that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel for the Reliably Intermittent podcast. You can find the podcast in audio form on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Like, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, like again, rate, review. All of those things help us out. Interaction is greatly appreciated, and we'll thank you in advance for doing it because we know you will. And until next time, thank you to you, Drew, again. And thank you to the listeners for joining us. And we will see you next time. And goodbye.
Later, brother.
We want to thank you again for joining us on the Reliably Intermittent podcast. Now it's time for a bit of a disclaimer. This podcast and all others on this feed are for informational purposes only and not legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed by listening to this podcast or any others on the feed. Should you require or want legal advice, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney or statutory legal counsel as the case may be. Thanks again for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.